In this problem, we are asked to solve the quadratic equation for x. We have learned several different ways to solve a quadratic. I personally like to fall back on the quadratic formula because it is given on the EOCT. So in order to use the quadratic formula, you will find your a, b, and c value. There is no term with x, therefore b is equal to 0. We can then plug this into the quadratic formula and you get what I have written down here. The next step is to plug this into the calculator, but what you must do first is plug everything under the square root into the calculator. So plug in 0 squared minus 4 times 9 times 16. We get a negative 384 under the radical sign. If you have typed that into your calculator with the negative under the square root, you will get a syntax error. So we know that square root of a negative number, we can take out the square root of negative 1, which is I. So we take out I, and then we can put the square root of positive 384 in our calculators, and that gives us 8 square root of 6. So we have 8i square root of 6 because we took out the imaginary part. That is all divided by 2 times 8, which is 18. You can simplify 8 over 18 to 4 over 9. So your final answer is plus or minus 4i times the square root of 6 divided by 9. You get 2 answers when you solve this quadratic. In this problem, we are asked to find the solutions to this quadratic equation. We have 12x squared equals negative 300. Since you have something on one side and another thing on the other side, to me, this screams solve by square root, by taking the square root. You may always move everything to the left side and use the quadratic formula. But in order to save yourself a little bit of time, let's solve by taking the square root. Divide both sides by 12 because we want to get x squared by itself. So we are left with x squared equals negative 25. To undo the x squared and get x by itself, we will take the square root of both sides. The square root of negative 25, we need to take out the square root of negative 1, which is I, and then you can put the square root of 25 in your calculator. But we know the square root of 25 is 5. So we are left with 5i. And don't forget, when you take the square root, you are left with the positive and negative of that answer. So you have 2 solutions, plus or minus 5i. For this problem, we want to find the solutions to the equation. You may attempt to solve this by factoring, by doing a times c if you want, or you can use the quadratic formula. Your a value is 2, your b value is 3, and your c value is 9. So you plug this into the quadratic formula to get what I have written on here. Then you will place what's under the square root, or your discriminant, into the calculator, and you get negative 3 plus or minus the square root of negative 63. Whenever you are finding the discriminant, you know that you should not use the square root symbol. If you do this in your calculator, you can get syntax error at times. So play it safe and just put the discriminant in the calculator and do this in pieces. Then you can take out the square root of negative 1. So you're going to get negative 3 plus or minus I times the square root of 63 over 4. Place the square root of 63 into your Multiview or your TI-36 Pro calculators, and it will simplify the square root for you. The square root of 63 simplifies to be 3 square root of 7. Don't forget, you've taken out the square root of negative 1, so you should have I. So your final answer is negative 3 plus or minus 3i times the square root of 7 all over 4. This question just wanted us to factor the expression. There is no equal sign and there is nothing to solve for. Looking at these two terms, 16a to the fourth and 81, you can see that both of them are perfect squares. There is a subtraction sign in the middle, so this becomes a difference of perfect squares. So you will take the square root of the first term and you will take the square root of the second term. The square root of 16a to the fourth is 4a squared. The square root of 81 is plus 9 and minus 9. So you get 4a squared plus 9 times 4a squared minus 9. This is a difference of squares problem. This question asks us to write this quadratic equation in vertex form. This right now is in standard form. So in order to put something in vertex form, you need to find the vertex, the h, and the k value. So to find the x value of your vertex, which is h, you do negative b over 2 times a. b is 6, a is 2 for this problem. So we do negative 6 over 2 times 2. That simplifies to be negative 3 over 2. You now have the x value of your vertex, or the h value, when we're putting it into vertex form. We need to find k. We will take that x value and substitute it back in to the original equation to find y. If you are using the Multiview or the TI-36 Pro calculators, you can type this equation into your table button, press enter, 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 and go to where x is negative 3 over 2, or negative 1.5, excuse me, and it will give you the y value, which is negative 7 over 2. You now have h and k. When you go from standard form to vertex, your a value stays the same. So we are going to substitute our a, h, and k into vertex form. Our vertex form is given to you on the EOCT. It is f of x equals a times x minus h squared plus k. So you get 2 times x plus 3 over 2 squared minus 7 over 2. The reason we get an addition sign in our parentheses is because we will end up with minus h. So minus a negative h value is the same as adding. This problem tells us that x squared is used to calculate the area of a square, where s is the side length of the square. We know that all sides of a square are the same. So if the area for the square that this problem is referencing is 8x squared, that means that 8x is essentially your s, or your side length. So our answer to this problem has to be D. It is not 8 because 8x is what is being squared. That is represented by the parentheses being around 8x. This problem gives us a quadratic expression. Yes, it has a bunch of words, but we need to make sure we read through it and just pick out what is important. We go to the very last line of this problem to find out what the question is asking us to do. It wants us to find the maximum height of the water, or the maximum of that quadratic expression. Remember that the max or the min, depending on what you have, is always the vertex. So essentially, all this question is asking us to do is find the vertex. We have a quadratic equation in standard form. So to find the vertex, you do negative b over 2a. Our a value is negative 1. Our b value is 8. So to find the x value of our vertex, we get negative 8 over 2 times negative 1, which is 4. So the x value of the vertex, which is the maximum, is 4. We then substitute that in to find the y. When you substitute 4 back in for x, you need to make sure that you are putting 4 squared in parentheses because the problem says negative t squared. So the negative is outside of the t squared. When you put this in the calculator the exact way I have it written, you get the y value to be 18. Our vertex is 4, 18. But the question wants just the maximum height. It doesn't ask for the maximum point. So x in this problem, or t, represented the time, while h of t, or the y, represented the height. So that means our answer is the y value of the vertex, which is 18 feet. This problem asks us to find the zeros of the function represented by the quadratic expression. We know that zeros are the same as x-intercepts, which is also the same as the solution. So you are going to find the solutions of this quadratic. You have two ways you can do it. You can use the quadratic formula, or you can attempt to factor this. I chose to factor this problem just to show you an example of factoring. I'm sorry for it being a little blurry, but what you do to factor this is you are going to have to multiply your a times c because a is not 1. When you multiply a times c, you get x squared plus x minus 6. Your c value is negative, so you will figure out what factors will subtract to give you the b value. We know that 3 and 2 will subtract to give you 1, and they will multiply to give you c, which is 6. Then when you try to choose your signs, they have to be opposite because c is negative, and the larger factor must get the sign of b. So you get x plus 3 times x minus 2. Then in order to find the zeros, you will set each of those factors equal to 0. So x plus 3 equal to 0. You then subtract both sides by 3 to get what x is. So x is negative 3. Then you will set your other factor equal to 0, which is x minus 2 equals 0. Then to solve that for x, you add 2 to both sides, and you get x to equal 2. So the solutions to this equation, or the zeros, are negative 3 and 2. This problem is a word problem that talks about companies' profit for selling a certain number of items. The profit is our y. The number of items we sell is x. So this question asks us to find the number of items sold to get a profit of $0. So that means our y value is 0. So you are going to take this quadratic expression and you are going to set it equal to 0. You can then solve this by using the quadratic formula. A equals negative 1, B equals 70, and C equals negative 600. When you plug this into the quadratic formula, you get what I have written. Then you can plug in what is underneath the square root into your calculator, and you can do this in pieces. You should get two separate answers, and they come out to be 10 and 60. Another way you can do a problem like this when you get to the EOCT is working backwards. Sometimes we freak out when we get word problems and we don't know what to do. So if you get stuck, you can always plug in your choice for A, B, C, and D and see which one will give you 0. So part A says x would be 0. So if you plug in 0 for x, you end up with negative 600. So that is not correct. Then you can try the same thing for the answers in part B, part C, and part D. and you will just work backwards and figure out which will give you a profit of 0. So you've got two different options of how to solve this multiple choice question. This problem tells us the product of two consecutive positive integers is 132. We are to write an equation and then figure out what the consecutive integers are. Consecutive means numbers that are next to each other. You don't know what either one of them is. So you have to call the first one x, because we don't know it. The second one has to be the number that comes right after that. So the number that comes right after 1 is 2. The number that comes after that is 3. Each time you're adding 1. So the consecutive integer to x is just x plus 1. It then tells us in the problem to find the product of the integers. So that means we are going to multiply them. So we are going to multiply the first integer by the second one, and we are going to set it equal to 132. So we get x times x plus 1 equals 132. You will distribute the x to both terms to get x squared plus x equals 132. What we have is a quadratic expression. So we can solve this using the quadratic formula. You just need to subtract 132 by both sides so that you have the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. When you use the quadratic formula, you get your answers to be 11 and 12. You can always check yourself by multiplying those two. 11 times 12 does in fact equal 132. So you know you are correct. This problem gives us the formula for the volume of a cylinder, and it tells us to solve for R. This problem, or this equation, is solved for V, since V is by itself on the left side. So in order to solve for R, we are going to isolate R, or get it by itself. So when we have V equals pi r squared times height, we need to get rid of everything that's on either side of the r. So we are going to divide both sides by pi times h. So we get V over pi times h equals r squared. To undo something that's squared, you will take the square root of both sides. Therefore, r equals the square root of V over pi times h. All you are doing in this one is using letters, no numbers, so you should get an equation that has letters in it. This is the second part to the problem from before. We were told before to get the volume formula for a cylinder in terms of R. So part B gives us the volume of a cylinder, it gives us the height, and it asks us to find R. So you will use the equation you found in part A, and you will plug in the volume, and you will plug in the height. So you get R equals the square root of 200 pi over 8 pi. You can plug this in the calculator using the fraction button. You will first hit second x squared to get the square root. Then you will press the fraction button, type in 200 pi, press the down arrow and type in 8 pi. Then press the right arrow to exit the fraction and press enter. You will get approximately 5. This question asks us to graph the quadratic equation. It is given to us in standard form, so we must find the vertex first by using negative b over 2a. Then you will substitute that value back into the equation to find k. You get your vertex to be 1, negative 12. You want to plot your vertex, and you want to plot 2 points on either side of the vertex. in order to get the parabola. Then it asks us to find the domain, range, x and y intercept, decide if we have a max or min, find the zeros, and the intervals of increase and decrease. The domain for this is all real numbers, and that will always be true for a quadratic unless you have endpoints. The range of a quadratic goes from the minimum y value to the maximum y value. The minimum y value is negative 12. The max y value keeps going towards infinity. There is no set maximum value. The x-intercept is where it crosses the x-axis, meaning the y value is 0. So you may use your table and go to where y is 0, or you can set this quadratic expression equal to 0 and solve for the solutions, which is the same as the x-intercept, by using the quadratic formula. And then it asks us to find the y-intercept, which means the x value is 0. So you will substitute in 0 for the x value, or you may go to the table on your calculator and find when x is 0, and the y value will be negative 9. This graph opens up, so we have a minimum. Remember, the minimum and the maximum are always just your vertex. Therefore, our minimum is at 1, negative 12. Then, to do intervals of increase and decrease, you will draw a line for your axis of symmetry. Our axis of symmetry is x equals 1. You need to find the domain of the left side and the domain of the right side. Interval of increase and decrease are always parts of your domain. The left side is decreasing. The left side of our graph goes from negative infinity to 1. That is the domain of the left side, and that is decreasing when we read it from left to right. That means that the right side will be our interval of increase, and the domain of the right side of our parabola goes from 1 to positive infinity.
For this one, we can draw a picture. It says a garden measuring 8 feet by 12 feet will have a walkway around it. So we can draw our garden, so it's 8 by 12. And then the walkway has a uniform width, and the area covered by the garden and the walkway is 192. So we're going to say our uniform width is W. You make it X, whatever variable you want. So the total length and width of our garden and the walkway, for our width we get 8 plus W, and for our length 12 plus W. It says the area covered by both the garden and the walkway is 192. So what is the width of the walkway? So what we can do is we can take our length times our width and multiply those together and set it equal to our area, which is 192. So when we multiply 8 plus W times 12 plus W using the box method or FOIL, you get W squared plus 20W plus 96. So what we need to do is we now need to solve by either factoring, quadratic formula, however you want, and we need to subtract 192 on both sides to set our quadratic function equal to 0. So you get W squared plus 20W minus 96. We can factor it out and we get W plus 24 times W minus 4 equals 0. This works because positive 24 minus 4 gives us our B term, which is 20, and 24 times negative 4 gives us our C term, which is negative 96. We can set each factor equal to 0, and we get our W is either negative 24 or 4. Since we can't have a negative distance, we're going to have our width being 4.
This question wants us to solve the quadratic equation using the square root method. We have x squared minus 100 equals 0. So in order to do the square root method, you are going to add 100 to both sides. You get x squared equals 100, and then to get x by itself, you will take the square root of both sides. The square root of 100 is positive and negative 10. This question asks us what the solutions to the equation are. We will use the quadratic formula in order to find the solutions to this equation. The quadratic formula is given to you on the EOCT. So you will plug in your A, B, and C value where they belong and then solve from there, or simplify.
An object is thrown in the air with an initial velocity of 5 meters per second from a height of 9 meters. The equation h of t equals the following models the height of the object in meters after t seconds. How many seconds does it take for the object to hit the ground? Well, when it hits the ground, it equals 0. So we can just set this function equal to 0 and solve for our x value or our t value for time. So we can use the quadratic formula, which is negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. We can take our a, b, and c values and put them into our formula. So a is negative 4.9, b is 5, and c is 9. So we get the top formula, which is negative 5 plus or minus square root 5 squared minus 4 times negative 4.9 times 9 all over 2 times negative 4.9. Always simplify what's under the radical first, and we get 201.4. And then we can get the square root of that, which is 14.19. And then we just separate it to get our positive and our negative. So negative 5 plus 14.19 divided by negative 9.8. And we get negative 0.94. And then we also have negative 5 minus 14.19 divided by negative 9.8. And you get 1.96. Since we can't have a negative amount of time, we know that the object will hit the ground in 1.96 seconds.
This problem asks us to find the solutions to the systems of equations using the graph shown. We have two different graphs for two different functions. The solutions will be their points of intersection. Remember, solutions also use the x values. So the solutions are negative 4 and 3 because our 2 points of intersection are at x equals negative 4 and x equals 3. This problem wants us to use the table to find the average rate of change. The interval gives us the x value. So our x values of the 2 points we want to use are negative 2 and 0. So we go to our table and find the y value of those x points. So our ordered pairs that we are going to use are negative 2, 15, and 0, 5. We will then plug that into the average rate of change formula, or the slope formula, which is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. You can plug this into the calculator using the fraction button, and you will get your average rate of change to be negative 5.
If a function is even, then the exponents are all going to be even. If they're odd, the exponents are all going to be odd. And if it's neither, you're going to have a mix of even and odd exponents. So for this one, we have an exponent of 3 and an exponent of 1, because x without a power, we already know, is to the power of 1. So it is odd because the exponents are both odd numbers. If they were all even numbers, then the function would be even. So we are given a function, g of x, and our parent function, which is x squared. The only thing that's different between these two is the negative 3 out in front. The negative tells you that your function is going to be reflected over the x-axis, and the 3 gives it a vertical stretch of 3. So g of x is reflected and has a vertical stretch of 3. When you're comparing functions, it's best to put it into kind of the same format. So since g of t is given to us in a table, we can kind of do that with our f of t function. So we know that when the ball hits or starts out at 0, it has an initial height of 4. And so when we put 0 in for our time, in f of t, we get 5 seconds. So it says, which statement best compares the length of time each ball is in the air? When it says a statement like this, it's best to look at all 4 statements to see which one best fits what we're given. It says the ball represented by f of t is in the air for about 5 seconds, which we found that out with our little work to the side. And it says the ball represented by g of t is in the air for about 3 seconds, which we can see in our table of values. So pretty much A is going to be our answer, but it's best to look at the rest of them to see how they compare. The ball represented by f of t is in the air for about 3 seconds. Well, we found that that's false based on our work, and that's also what C says, so we know that that's wrong. And then the ball represented by f of t is in the air for about 4 seconds. That's also false because we found out it lasts for 5 seconds. So A is truly our answer for this one. For this one, we're given the function for S of t, and it gives us what V and H and A mean in our formula. So all we need to do is take our velocity, which they say is 80, and put it where V is, our height, which they say is 4, put it where H is, and our acceleration due to gravity, which they say is 32, we put that where A is. So we can simplify this by multiplying negative 0.5 times 32, and we get negative 16. And then we also need to put it in standard form. From this, we can put it into our quadratic formula. So A is negative 16, B is 80, C is 4. And when we put it in there, we simplify what's under the radical, and then we separate it and do our positive and our negative. And the best choice is 5 seconds. So D is your answer choice for this problem.
This question gives us a graph and it wants us to find the quadratic regression curve. We know quadratic regression must be found using the TI-36 Pro calculators. You have 3 points, so you will write the ordered pairs down for all 3 of these points. You will plug in the x values into your L1. You will plug in the y values into your L3. You do that by going to data and then type in all 3 x values, then push to the right arrow and type in all 3 y values. You will then press second mode and it will take you back to your home screen. You will then press second data since you're pressing data for the second time. You will push your down arrow to get to quadratic regression and press enter. Then press enter, enter, enter until you get your A, B, and C value. You will plug your A, B, and C value into the standard form of a quadratic to get the equation y equals negative 18.33x squared plus 101.67x minus 46.25. Then this question asks us for the maximum height. Well, we know max and min are the vertex of our graph. So we need to find the vertex. When it is in standard form, you will use negative b over 2a to find the x value of the vertex. We get that to be 2.77. Then, in order to find the y value of the maximum, you will plug that x value back in to the equation that you found using your quadratic regression feature on your calculator. You get the y value of your vertex to be 94.7 feet. The question just wanted us to find the maximum height, and height is the y value. Therefore, our answer is the y value that we found, which is 94.7 feet. This is a word problem that gives us a quadratic function. The best tip you can use is to go straight to the last sentence and figure out what the question is asking. It is asking us, what is the estimated population of the city in 2015? So now we know what we're looking for. We have our equation, so we need to figure out what our x represents and what our y represents. The problem tells us x is the number of years after 2005. So, how many years are between 2015 and 2005? You will subtract, and that gives you 10. So we know our x value is 10, and we want to find the population, which is our output, or our y value, when x is 10. So you will substitute 10 into this quadratic equation for x, and you get 590. But when you read the problem, it tells you f of x is the population of the city in thousands of people. Therefore, our answer is 590,000. Make sure you are using the clues from the problem. Always start by figuring out what you're trying to find, and then from there you can work to get your solution.
For this one, it helps to draw out a picture. It says Annie is framing a photo with a length of 6. We're going to draw a small picture. We have 6 for our length, and it says a width of 4. So we have a 4 by 6 picture in the middle. Then it says it's framed. So we're going to draw our frame around it, and it says that the photo to the edge of the frame is x inches. So we're adding to our length and our width x. So we have 6 plus x for our length and 4 plus x for our width. It says the combined area of the photo and frame is 63 square inches. So 63 is our area, and it equals our length times width, which is 4 plus x times 6 plus x. You can either FOIL or use the box method to multiply this out, and you get x squared plus 10x plus 24. Since we have a trinomial and a quadratic function, we can solve for x by factoring out, or any other method you like. And so this needs to be set equal to 0. So we're going to subtract 63 on both sides, and we're left with x squared plus 10x minus 39 equals 0. We can factor this out and get x plus 13 times x minus 3, because 13 minus 3 gives us our b term, which is 10, and 13 times negative 3 gets our c term, which is negative 39. When we set our two factors equal to 0, we get x equals negative 13 and 3. So we have our quadratic function, and then it wants to know how wide is the photo and frame together. Since we can't have a negative distance, we're going to go with 3. And so we're going to put 3 with our width formula, which is 4 plus x. So we get 4 plus 3 equals 7.